Hi, everyone. First of all, it is so great to be here, to be in a room full of such young and passionate people. We've been building this summit for 10 months now, and to see this full room with so many excited faces throughout the day is truly a delight. It is my honor to be here moderating this segment with Leeza. Thank you so much for being here, Leeza. In today's segment, like the MCs told you, we're going to be talking about advocacy. We're going to be talking about the importance of advocacy for crucial issues like SRH and the role that social media plays in the same. What a joy to have you here, Leeza. Thank you so much for joining us. And before I begin, I would really love for you to introduce yourself to the audience and share with them your journey and how it's brought you here to be doing what you do.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everyone who's attending this afternoon. It's such a privilege to be able to speak to you all and to be here. So thank you to Girl Up for having me. My name is Leeza Mangaldas. I'm a sexuality educator and author. I'm also the founder of a pleasure brand called Leezu's. But really, I never thought I'd see the day where pleasure-focused sex education could be sustainable as my work. You know, it started as a passion project. I was working as a journalist and TV presenter right out of college. I'm 33 now, believe it or not. But in my early 20s, when I started working, I was hosting shows on TV for news channels and then for sports channels. Basically, I was never getting to talk about what I wanted to, because I think that middle-aged men often making the decisions of what a young woman at a TV station gets to talk about see young women as only slotted for certain types of conversations. I was being made to talk about cars and football, luxury brands. It was fun, but it wasn't what I wanted to talk about. And so I just started a YouTube channel in 2017 alongside the journalistic work I was doing. I was like, this is too frustrating waiting around to be able to be granted the opportunity to tell stories or have conversations that I want to have. So I'm going to do this other work because I need to pay rent, but I'm also going to do something that allows for me to talk about what I care about, even if it's with 3 people who tune in. Because when I started out, there wasn't really this idea that you could have a career on the internet. Instagram wasn't even a video sharing platform at the time. And there weren't any Indian people that I knew of, at least, talking about sexuality on the internet yet. Or maybe there were a few, but I hadn't found them yet. It wasn't as it's still niche, but it feels more mainstream now than it did back then. Anyway, long story short, people found my content and resonated with it, and over the years it just grew, and I was able to eventually quit doing the other work and really focus on this full time, and now I'm here. So I'm so grateful that's what happened. I think there was a moment, in 2018 the Me Too movement happened. Section 377 was repealed. I think young people collectively were so frustrated with this lack of openness around these topics because they have real-world consequences, right? I mean, when we're not only talking about health, we're also talking about rights, health and rights, SRHR, right? What could be more important? How can we be quiet about our health and rights? That is not acceptable. And I think there were enough young people who shared that frustration, and so I think I was lucky to be part of a sort of collective subconscious that had had enough of the shame and the silence, and I thought we all deserved better.
Thank you for sharing your journey, Leeza. And like you mentioned, it was not easy to begin with, but now you're at 1 million. Congratulations on that. Yes, let's cheer for her.
Thank you so much.
But I'm sure that journey has been with its own share of obstacles and challenges and walls that you've had to push through. So I'm very curious to know more about that journey and how you've overcome such challenges, considering, that you talk about such an important but sensitive issue like SRH.
There are a few challenges that I perhaps should talk about one by one. I think one of the big challenges for many people who might want to do this work but don't get to do it is that it's not the trolls on the internet that they're worried about. The trolling will start at home, right? I am really lucky. I had a very supportive family. My parents watch my videos, comment on them, help me translate things if I need to write something in Hindi, because unfortunately my Hindi is not great. I grew up in Goa. They're basically absolutely 100% supportive of what I do. But I know for a lot of people, I mean, they'll even say, we can't share your videos and our stories because if our mom sees or dad sees or brother sees, we get in trouble. And so I think one huge obstacle that keeps people from being able to talk about their sexuality and sexual health or seek health services, et cetera, is what will my own family think, right? And we have no privacy, and we're often afraid of the people around us judging us before even the public can judge us. So that's one challenge for people doing this work. I'm really lucky I didn't have that challenge. But many people will ask me, like, what do your parents think? As if your parents should be ashamed of you. You know, I'll get in the comments like, oh, like, what does your mom think of you? Especially from men, because an unmarried Indian woman shouldn't talk about sex, right? That's the kind of social conditioning we receive. So I think being resilient I do not believe what I'm doing is shameful. I believe it is vital. I believe it's so unfortunate that we've been conditioned to see, sex in the body and sexuality and pleasure as shameful. For me, there's like no question in my head that it's not shameful. But it can be hard to reject that conditioning because most of us are on the receiving end of that conditioning. So it doesn't affect me, but I think if I were much younger, for example, or if I did have someone in my own family shaming me for it, this work would be much harder to do. So for anyone trying to do this work, I think building your own resilience against shame and dismantling your own sense of shame around this stuff, because it is hard not to inherit at least some shame, is vital. Another challenge, I think, is that the platforms themselves are now increasingly also trying to sort of thrust their shame onto you. You know, we're having to censor basic language around anatomy and sexuality in order for platforms like Instagram or YouTube or whatever else not to flag your content as inappropriate or take it down or restrict its reach. And that's something that's happening increasingly. And it's funny how in India we think like, things are really conservative here and it's better in the West. But let me remind you that the country that Meta and Google, all these platforms are coming out of, right, is the USA, where currently safe abortion is a right that's being cracked down on, right? So there's this anti-right sentiment, I think, that is actually perhaps even worse in Western countries, because here we just don't talk about stuff. Most people don't have a strong opinion on abortion because they barely know anything about abortion, whereas in the West, this type of thing is literally impacting how these platforms are moderating their content. So, but we're reliant on these platforms, right? We use these global platforms to do this work. Unfortunately, we've built our empires on land we don't own. So censorship is a big issue, and anyone starting out now, I think, will face that issue much more than we were able to. As someone who started several years ago, there were some rosy days of the internet where it seemed like a place where you could say what you wanted to. It's becoming more and more like traditional media, where there's a lot of red tape and you can't always say what you want to. It breaks my heart to have to misspell words, because I think that makes it seem like I'm ashamed to spell this word right, or this is an unspeakable word, But no, I'm just trying to not get kicked off the platform. And then I think one more challenge is that you can't always control how you're going to be perceived. So unfortunately, I think especially for women and queer people talking about sexuality, a lot of men seem to think that you're asking for it, which obviously you are not. You're never asking for it unless you ask for it, right? So I don't need to tell you that. But yeah, I think it can be a little bit overwhelming to be on the receiving end of so much unsolicited, sort of like sometimes even aggressive or forceful commentary about your body, or like, a sexual sort of attention that you're not seeking when you're trying to educate. So that's something, again, you have to, I suppose, either learn to ignore. It's unfortunate. I think actually it's just par for the course when you have a public account on social media. I think you could be talking about lipstick or cooking or anything and probably still receive some of that. So unfortunately, I don't know how else to deal with it other than block, restrict, delete, ignore. I haven't yet found a solution where behaviors are corrected. I wish people would do better, but until they do better, I think you have to protect yourself. And then, last obstacle. As someone who is not a doctor, not a family planning commission person, not a public health professional, I'm just a woman. who was interested in sexuality and sexual health, who was lucky to have an education that allowed for me to, in an academic context, explore these topics. But beyond a point, like, I am just like anyone else. And I think that these subjects, unfortunately, there's a lot of gatekeeping around who gets to talk about this. I get asked very often, are you a doctor or are you a porn star? Like, how do you know this stuff? And how come you're talking, like, how do you have the right to talk about this stuff? And I believe that you do not have to be in any of these things, no shame and no disrespect to either doctors or porn stars. However, I don't think you need to be qualified to know about your anatomy or to know about consent or to understand the basics of contraception, to understand, you know, what an STI is and how you can get tested, or to understand what a pleasure and how your arousal works. I think these are subjects that everyone should know about. For me, these fall into the category of general knowledge and should not be gatekept. You know, and unfortunately, there's this idea that this information is either pathologized, like it's inherently medicalized. You know, the umbrella question that I get is, am I normal? If I could put all the questions I get from people into one bucket, the overarching question is, am I normal? Even though the concerns will often be like absolutely normal stuff, but we're so not used to talking about sex and the body as if it's normal, that so often we think there's something like medically wrong with our very being, because there's no one to tell you otherwise. It doesn't even seem okay to talk about it, right? So I think there's like definitely this pathologization of anything sexual, and also gatekeeping around who gets to talk about this information that we need to address. And on the other hand, there's also the only other light it tends to be seen is that like this is vulgar or obscene or pornographic, right? So my intention is to try and make it feel normal to talk about this, just like we can all talk about food. You don't have to be, you know, a Michelin star chef to talk about food, right? You don't have to be, I mean, for many other aspects of our everyday lives, we get to talk about this stuff and we realize we all deserve to be able to seek information and resources out. But with this particular topic, there's a strange amount of gatekeeping, and I think we should do better there. I also think, though, that we should be discerning about the media we consume. There's a lot of misinformation out there. I have had it with the amount of like pseudoscientific stuff, often spouted by the likes of Godman on the internet, where you know, they're using the reverence that culturally we tend to have for religious figures to sell you completely unscientific information, and often shame-laden information. So be discerning, be critical of the media you consume. And if you're putting out information, always be absolutely sure that what your information you're putting out is scientifically accurate and judgment-free, at the minimum. Like, otherwise, I just think there's no excuse in this day and age to put factually incorrect information out into the world. Like, it is not difficult to make sure what you're consuming and what you're sharing is factual and judgment-free. Sorry, I talk a lot.
Thank you for sharing your points. And in fact, one of the things that you said, that we should be able to normalize these conversations, that is actually so important, because a big part of growing up is to have curiosity, is to have the want to know about what you're feeling and how you're growing up. And so a lot of that information is not available to adolescents and young people growing up, or they don't have the safe spaces to have those conversations. I'm going to actually share a bit of data that we found, and I want to get this right, so I will read this out. A survey of close to 11,000 adolescent girls from Bihar and Uttar Pradesh found that 1/3 of the participants who used social media were more likely to accurately have on them the SRH information. So they were able to accurately access SRH information. And that is so much responsibility on people like you. So my question really is that, how do you ensure that your platform is able to, A, create that safe space for people to really be able to share their questions and their concerns with you in a way that they feel they will be heard, and also then to be able to provide them with reliable information. How are you able to create that space?
So I think that, people begin to trust you over time, right? I didn't really seek people's, I didn't say, you have to tell me, you better tell me. No, people are just telling me. Now, I don't take that lightly, And in the way I respond to this is twofold. I never give direct. I am not in a position to tell someone on the internet who I've never met, who I don't know, and also, as I said, I am not a doctor, I'm not a therapist. If I'm getting a question where the answer is specific to that person's context and would be better off with, information about their medical history or circumstances, et cetera, which mainly any one-on-one conversation, I think, becomes difficult on the internet because I don't know the person, right? You might feel like you know me, but I don't know the person. And I'm not in a position neither to protect, because I would like to protect my own privacy and safety, but also because I don't see myself as qualified to provide direct one-on-one counseling or information or kind of some sort of therapy, treatment, whatever you want to call it. So I do not respond directly. However, I read the messages that come into me, and I often find that a lot of people have the same question, right? And so then I will answer that overarching question publicly. I will make a reel or a video or a story, right? And I might post the question anonymously. I put these AMA things where people can ask the question, where the expectation from the person who submits the question is that you will post the question, right? So there are these formats within the app that allow for a sort of respecting the boundaries of both the asker and me, right? While still having this important conversation. I think it is important to protect yourself. You do not owe anybody like this emotional labor of becoming their therapist on Instagram, right? And if you're not a therapist, that's not even okay for you to do. So I do not provide, I cannot answer every DM that comes my way. I do think, though, that unlike traditional media, which was a one-way street where I'm a TV presenter, I do my show and then I go home, it's very exciting that on social media you get feedback instantly almost, right? And so you get to very quickly have a sense of what's resonating with people, what questions and concerns tend to be the most frequent ones, what subjects people would like to learn more about. Maybe you thought people already knew about something, but actually there's room to talk about it, or maybe you thought they would want to know about something, but actually that's something that's well established already. It's great to have that feedback, and I think especially with sort of millennials and Gen Z, we're so our phone is such a part of how we experience the world that I would say overwhelmingly the interactions I have and the feedback I get on the internet has been positive. There's definitely, I get asked all the time, like, don't you get trolled? Isn't it horrible? But I would say for every 1,000 messages I receive, maybe 100 are annoying and 900 are wonderful. So I really like that it's a two-way street. But yeah, I think I try and make sure my information is always factually accurate. I always sort of try and make sure also that I'm recommending other sources if it's not an area of expertise, or also highlighting other people's lived experiences if it's something I don't have the lived experience of. I really think that like the whole point of doing this work is to support and amplify everyone doing this work, because we need to do, like, there's so not enough, it's remains such a sort of stigmatized topic that I think there's so much room also to be supportive of each other and really amplify each other's work as well. And so if I don't know something, or if I don't feel like I have enough experience with something, I will try and find other resources that do have the expertise and experience around, and then share those, So did I answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Cool. I think you'd asked, like, how do I make sure that what I put out is the responsibility of putting out this content, right?
And
Yeah,
creating
did I cover it?
space.
Okay.
So before I move ahead to my final question, I would also like to let the audience know that you have the space to ask Leeza your own questions. If you go back to your digital booklet, you will find the Mentimeter link where you can put in your questions, and we can take those up at the end. Before I go to the Q&A, I'd actually like to ask you one final question from our side. So a big part of Girl Up is advocacy, and a big part of the audience today here is members and leaders from our Girl Up clubs. And with their Girl Up clubs, they are always trying to put out information, like you said, reliable information about issues that they care about, including SRH. So as someone who also does that, what would be your sort of advice to them to really curate spaces that are inclusive and that are informative for the audience that they are trying to share the information with?
Well, I mean, I can give you a lot of practical tips. Do you want motivational advice, like, sort of flowery motivation, or some practical skill-based, like, do this on the app and it's going to work for you type of tips?
I would say skill-based.
Skill-based? So, I mean, you probably know that, like, video is currently having a moment, right? I imagine the platform many of you are using is Instagram. Reels remain the most sort of large reaching content format. So I think if you're not already doing video, you should. I think there's also some best practices around how you put out video that are easier to optimize than ever before. For example, captioning, using closed captions or subtitles on your videos, increase their accessibility for people who may not be able to hear what's being said, but also just many people listen with the sound off. It's good to have the captions on, and there's AI-based captioning apps that make it even easier than before to do that, so just to do that. I also think that using regional language is a very powerful strategy for reaching people who might have less access to this information than people who speak English, because there's more information generally on the internet from other countries as well in English, whereas there's less sources of judgment-free, scientifically accurate, and fun information in our regional languages. So if you speak a language other than English, please make content in that language. I cannot tell you how valuable that is, and also you'll be likely to be pleasantly surprised also with how many people it reaches, because there's a demand for it and an unmet demand for it. I wish I spoke more languages. I also think that small things like, trying to optimize your video quality, like sit near a window so that there's enough light. Those small things, so that what you're doing is as sort of easy to consume as possible. They can see what's going on. They can hear and read what's going on. So like your basic audio quality and video quality, small things like making sure you're in a quiet room or sitting by the window can make a big difference, as opposed to just shooting in a noisy place or with not enough light on. I'm not saying you have to invest in expensive equipment or anything, but just like using natural light and the quiet spaces to your advantage go a long way. I also think that, I wish that we could somehow collectively sort of advocate against the censorship of a lot of this information. I don't know what's going to happen, but Meta's platforms, and generally a lot of the digital media platforms, are becoming increasingly sort of hostile to this type of advocacy, and I think that's really unfortunate, and I think we shouldn't just be like, okay, so I hope that perhaps if enough people are unhappy about that, they'll do something. Because I also do think these rules, to some extent, what are community guidelines, right? They're Meta's idea of what they think the community is okay with, that the majority of people on this app are comfortable seeing or not comfortable seeing, and they're under the impression right now that the majority of people are not comfortable seeing, content around sex and the body being clearly and straightforwardly approached. So is that the reality? In which case, that's sad then. If that's a reflection of the majority of society, then that makes me quite sad. But I would like to think that is not the case, and that there's enough or more people who also do value this information and don't want a platform telling them what they can and can't learn about. So because otherwise I think anyone starting this work, it can be very disheartening if it's reaching 0 people. You're putting all this effort into making the content, and the platform's not letting your content reach people. It's not a level playing field, right? You could be talking about, climate change or something instead, and hopefully reaching people with it. So I hope that we can somehow advocate for this information to continue to be distributable.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, and I hope that that's been helpful for our clubs when they do curate their content. We do have time for one audience question, and I do have one here. So the question is, at what age do you think, and how do you think, can SRH information and knowledge start to be, given out to young people, and how do you think it should progress?
I think that ideally sex education or SRH information, however you want to call it, is not a one-time conversation, right? It has to be ongoing, and I think some ideas can be part of the education of even like very, very, very young human beings, infants. I don't know. When you teach somebody about consent, it doesn't have to be in a sexual context, right? Consent is an aspect of everyday interaction, like, cultivating a sense of intuitively of the ability to sort of decline participating in something, or to respect it when someone else doesn't want to do what you want to do, whether it's another kid taking your pencil box without asking, you understand that didn't feel good, right? Let's talk about that. Or, when you're teaching a very young kid about the body, why is it that we don't teach the names of certain parts? What message does that send? And also, aren't we disadvantaging this person from being able to communicate effectively if they experience any kind of discomfort or an untoward incident? They should have the vocabulary to explain to a parent, right? So I think we need to be talking to young people from literally infancy to well into adulthood, and there's age-appropriate and ongoing iterations of this conversation. It is not a one-time talk, and I mean, as opposed to elaborating on a specific curriculum or something, I think that you can look some up. There's some countries which do have more elaborate sex education curricula in schools. Not enough countries though, and unfortunately, some also have very abstinence-based and shame-laden approaches. So I think it's really important for us to try to remember that we don't want to be perpetuating shame when we do this work, right? What's the point of doing this work if we're actually strengthening the shame that you're likely to just receive anyway? So I also think that it should be culturally contextualized, and I think often like the templates we have are very Western, and it's something that is actually, that's one of the challenges too. I think often talking in regional languages about especially identity can be quite difficult because we have this borrowed vocabulary that's very anglicized. Like, I don't know how to talk about non-binary identity in Hindi, or how to use gender-neutral language around the body in Hindi. Like, how do I say vulva owner in Hindi? And how do I remain both clear and inclusive? Because sometimes while trying to be inclusive, many people just don't even understand what you're saying. It's a challenge. And in a country where neither is English really our first language, nor is Hindi our only language, we have so many languages, it can be quite difficult, especially when we only have this Western English model for the language around feminism and queer identity and identity beyond the binary and inclusivity. So I think, if we can also work together to try and create a vocabulary in our own languages and in ways that feel true to us and to our culture and to our everyday lives, that would really benefit us as well.
Thank you so much. Let's have a round of applause for Leeza. Thank you so much for being here, Leeza. And I'd like to close the segment with a short story of something that I actually witnessed as we were coming in. An attendee here met Leeza with such enthusiasm and so much gratitude about the work that Leeza does. And I think just people coming up to you with so much enthusiasm and gratitude shows the kind of an impact that you're making in their lives in real time and in real ways. So thank you not just for being here today, but for being you and for doing what you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being such a generous audience. Honestly, thank you so much. It means the world to meet people. This work can be quite isolating. I sit in my room and talk to my phone, so it's amazing to actually see you and hear from you about the fact that it resonates with you. Thank you so much.